I'm Gail Moscoso. We're here at the Holocaust Oral History Project. It's May 14th, 1996. I'm here with my partner, interviewer, Cy Levine. Our videographer is Katrina. And we're meeting again with JANINA SWIFT to continue her interview. So to start out again, JANINA, you were mentioning about after you had viewed your interview, the previous interview, that you saw some of the things that you wanted to talk about that you hadn't.
Yes.
Like the fear.
I kind of divide this interview into two parts. From beginning of the war to escape from jail and the second part. Then actually there is a small subdivision there from then to the day I decided that I have had it and I am going, as I put it to my mother, when the Russians were entering Poland, I announced to my mother, I'm not staying here. And she says, where are you going? And I said, west. Where west? I said, I have been occupied by the Russians. I have been occupied by the Russians, the Germans. I know what it is like. I have had it. Now we're going to go as far west as is necessary to be occupied by the British or the Americans. That's where I'm going, as far west as necessary. My mother was, at that point, which I started realizing, getting worn out by the war and the tension of providing the documents, providing the hiding places, sometimes scraping for money, having dangerous interviews, because when you were bribing people, each time that situation was very fraught with danger, because they could take your money and then denounce you to police or Gestapo or even kill you. So she started, also she had some experiences in World War I, and like everybody else in the world, and all the generals, you always fight the war that was. And the new one is entirely different. She wasn't prepared for it. So I discovered that my mother has made mistake. Sometimes she was overconfident. Sometimes she was too careful, scared. Where it was just uneven, not steady. And I didn't blame her for it. I just, the nature of living was that you had to realize what you were dealing with. But I understood, I sympathized with her. She lost members of her family very dear to her, and all that stress became more than she could handle. To a certain degree that was true for my aunt. The only one that stayed calm was Uncle Ivar, who tried to calm the two sisters and tell them not to panic. I remember specifically when he got called to go and visit Gestapo at Schucha in Warsaw, which was the place where this interrogation took place and where people usually was just one-way street. You went in, but you didn't get out. And he was asked to come. This was after Denmark was occupied by the Germans. So Denmark was not neutral anymore. It was theoretically aligned, friendly country, regardless how much the Danes didn't want to be occupied. And my mother and my aunts absolutely said we should all run away, change identities, hide, destroy everything what we couldn't take, give away, so the Germans won't get it. And Uncle Ivar said, no, I'm going. And he dressed himself with a great care, stuck a whole bunch of cigars in his pocket, took his walking stick and walked, normally he walked in Warsaw with a Danish flag, tiny little Danish flag in his lapel, and went to the Gestapo. Apparently they were trying, all the war they knew that he was up to something, but in the beginning of the war he was neutral, so it was difficult. Later on, they were pretending that Denmark, although was occupied by the Germans, they were treating them like a neutral guard. It wasn't true, but for the whole world, since he knew a lot of Swedish and Swiss and many South American people, through his work and through his business, they tried to keep that facade with him. So he went there, had an interview with them, came back. Apparently the questions were not as difficult or embarrassing as they could have been. Whether it was just an intimidation or real fishing expedition, nobody knew. But that was one of the times then I decided that a person had to be very cold and very realistic and calculating about the chances. If Ivar ran, not only my family but a lot of people that they were helping would have had to go on hiding and eventually would have been caught. So the fear was there. All you had to do is just fight it. One of the things that was very difficult on me is it was the journey to hell. In beginning of 1940, there was a paradox situation in Warsaw. Jewish people were required to wear armbands, but were actually not haunted. But Poles on the street, there were 3 or 4 days where they took 10,000 people off the streets of Warsaw. There was an action destined at potential people that could give trouble to the Germans. People that were educated, that means college professors, students, doctors, journalists, engineers, some policemen, some civil workers, anybody that priests, anybody that were potential opposition or underground or something. And later on, over the years, we started slowly discovering that the people, regardless of their age, health, condition, all were dead. It was just a matter of instant, few months, maybe a year. None of those people came back. The one exception maybe was that man that I showed you the photograph, Julek Krasnodębski, who was taken at the same time. Well, the hunting of people was very bad. And the Germans would close the street and put the trucks on and just went from two ends and swoop anybody. The only people that got through were the old, really old, that they could barely move, or they had German or Volksdeutsche documents. Occasionally somebody who worked in a industry that had a special Ausweis, that is a document telling that they work for industry that was necessary for defending the German Reich or something, weapon factory or something. Everybody else was taken, and they couldn't say they were sick or old or anything. They just got exterminated. Then when it was also a campaign of terror. The massive taking of people, at least Warsaw was always very anti-German and fought from the very beginning to the bitter end, meant that most families had somebody taken. And it wasn't really, but it was a hostage of their better behavior, that having a person taken by the Germans, it was their business to see that they didn't make their situation worse. After they finished with the Poles, they told the Jewish people to move to the ghetto. That means that whoever wasn't Jewish was thrown out from that district of Warsaw, and the Jews were being taken out of their homes and moved over there. They went either voluntarily or forcibly. It became illegal for them to live outside the ghetto. So in a small old district, enormous number of people were pushed together, which meant that room like this would probably have 2-3 families, maybe even more, live together, which meant they couldn't wash, which meant they couldn't have proper sanitation facilities, which became, their bodies became ridden with insects. There was not enough food. What there was provided by the Germans was not good, and black market started to thrive. 3 of my friends, and sorry I forgot to bring the picture. 3 of my friends from school Maria Rutkowska, Halszka Pruchnik, and Adela Lepa asked me to join them in going to the ghetto to visit 3 of girls, Jewish, that went to the ghetto with their families, that we went to the same class with. Their reasoning was, we cannot help everybody, but we can pick up somebody. So let's pick up 3 of our friends from school and see what we can do for them and their families. Now, they were operating on their own names, their own identification. They didn't have any bad mark with the Gestapo. I was the only one of the group that had false papers and had good reason to avoid any contact with German SS, SD, or whatever. That's who was guarding the ghetto, plus Polish and Jewish policemen. When you went to the ghetto, you had Polish policemen, Jewish policemen, SS, and SD. And they checked your documents and you went in. Well, I had to give it some thought, because by having false documents, I was not only putting myself in trouble, but I could possibly put my friends in a great danger. But I decided that you make choice in life. And I choose to live outside the ghetto. So I was going to act like my friends, and I went with them. In the beginning, the first 1 or 2 times, it went pretty smooth. We just showed our identification at the gate. They asked us for reason. The reason, we said we wanted to buy something. You didn't say that you had friends there. Just there was something, some shoemaker or somebody we wanted to buy somewhere. And at that time the Germans were still acting the good guys. They would let us in. We went to see those friends, and there we found very, very bad conditions. And they were torn, because either the relatives didn't want to leave the ghetto, they believed that they would be, if they would be taken any place, they would be taken to a workplace, they would be allowed to work in factories. Now, that belief, although it was totally false, was created by the Germans, because they took some Jewish people and put them to work in munition factories in Germany, and they made sure that they wrote back to their relatives to create that illusion that that's what was happening. But there were few and far between. Other people were just too many or too old. there was not only sisters but aunts and grandparents that were too feeble and too old. In 2 cases, the grandparents didn't speak anything else but Jewish, very little Polish, broken Polish. So hiding them outside the ghetto was just not possible. And we didn't have much to eat ourselves, but we always tried to take something. A scarf, a muffler, gloves, a couple of onions, something, you know, whatever we could scrape, because there the situation was much worse than outside the ghetto. Not only the houses were crowded, but actually the streets were crowded. There simply was not enough room on the sidewalks, so the people had to get off the sidewalk and walk partly on the streets. If Gestapo was walking by, or Germans, or German police, they will hit the people to get off the street, get on the sidewalks, which were already overcrowded and didn't have enough room on. Then we went a few times more. But the situation has changed. Now we couldn't go in there anymore through the gate by showing our German issued documents. We had to go, there were buildings that were, some of them even half of the building was in a ghetto and half was on the other side. And there were ways of finding some janitors that for little money will open some back door in a basement. So when you went through that basement, if you exited on the other end of the building, you were already in the ghetto. This was very dangerous because there was no way of, if the Germans caught you inside the ghetto, there was no way of showing that you came there legally. Or how you got in. And the Germans started catching those people because they were the smugglers used those back doors, basements. Usually there were basements, through basements you went. They were used by people that were smuggling money from ghetto, buying food outside the ghetto, and then bringing it back to the ghetto. We tried, we still could get by bribing the people and paying for the, we could get our friends out. But it became, at that time, just about impossible to get their grand aunts, grandparents, and so on. And the girls, 3 families. Eventually we said, we can take your brothers or sisters, but we cannot get accommodate. There is no place to hide them. Well, some of the girls decided to go. Of one case, I know that one of the girls came out, and I heard, now, once you got the people out of the ghetto, for safety reason, when they found a new place to stay, you broke off the contact. Just like in the underground. You didn't want to know what you didn't absolutely to have. Since we got them out and got them into hands of people that could provide them with documents and places to stay, it was better for us not to know. Because if you were interrogated by the Gestapo, you were likely to tell them everything what you knew. I heard later on that one of the girls decided that she had to go back to her parents. What happened to the other family, I don't know. Maybe they stayed outside, maybe they didn't. A lot of Jewish people that got out of that time did stay. For some of them it was too dangerous to stay in Warsaw, but they managed to find places, even on a farm, working, helping digging out potatoes and doing things. It was possible to hide in that way. It was not exactly the best life, but it was, usually in a country you ate a little better. And if the people that kept the Jewish people had a good story who it was, where they came from, like they came from a Russian-occupied part of Poland. That's how they lost their place to stay, their family. That's how they showed up on the doorstep. They were distant cousins, friends, relatives, whatever. One of the last trips to the ghetto stands out in my mind. That's what I call the journey to hell. We were pretty discouraged because of the pessimistic attitude of the people we were trying to rescue. And before we left the ghetto, we decided to sit down someplace and talk for a few minutes. It was, of course, impossible on the street, because you were never far enough from anybody not to overhear the conversation. So we decided to go to a coffee house restaurant. And there were people lying on the street. People didn't have money to do funerals. So when somebody died, they just dragged them on the street and left them there, stripping them of all their belongings and any identifications. Then the Jewish community had to do the funeral. It sounds awful, but people didn't have any money to survive. What else could they do? There were other people that didn't have anybody, and they died from cold and hunger on the street. And the strangest thing was that some of the people looked like skeletons covered with skin, but some of the people that died from hunger were actually very swollen and white, full of, I guess, water, and they looked, which wasn't true, almost fat. They died from hunger, but they were bloated. And to get to the restaurant, which was of course a black market restaurant, you had to walk between those dead bodies. Inside, there were lights. It was in Warsaw well known that if you wanted canned pineapple or can of caviar, or some super deluxe something, you went to buy it in a ghetto. Could get it there. So in that restaurants, people were eating, drinking. Some of them were very well dressed. There was little background music, smell of perfume, smell of cigarettes, good tobacco, not the peasant grown, raw, but real Turkish tobacco. And now I smoked everything from cherry leaves in newspaper to best Turkish cigarettes, so I knew what I was smelling. And then when you went there, you had to go out and walk through the row of beggars begging for money or food, and some of them already dead from hunger. I was so upset about it. And my friends were too, that years later, when we compared notice, we realized that through the whole war, till after the war, several years, as a matter of fact 20 years later, we never spoke about it. We all were there, and we never brought that particular day to conversation. We all stayed away from it. It was such a horrible experience. I don't remember how many, but suddenly ghetto was closed. Nobody in, nobody out. A lot of black troops around it and massive transports out of the ghetto. And the Germans took not only anybody in the ghetto, but actually people near the ghetto started getting shot. They cut off contact of Warsaw and ghetto. They obviously didn't want the population of Warsaw to know what was going on there. For a while it worked, but afterwards, as usually is in the underground, stories started to leak. Somebody escaped through the canals. Some worker talked, sanitation worker or something. And people started realizing. There is one day that I remember. It was before. That trip, I think, was my last trip. Before that, we had one trip when the Germans started getting already a little sloppy. It was very short time before they closed the ghetto. They didn't get enough people to fill the trains, transport from the street. So they were too lazy to go and close another street. Let's say they only needed 100 or less people. So it seemed to them too much trouble to go to the point of closing up another street just for a few people. So they started going into houses and putting people out. Basically, the easiest thing was just get them off the street, because people lived in such horrible condition that they got out of those overcrowded, dirty things, to hear something, to see somebody, to just get out. So that was the easiest way. But when they were decided they didn't want to bother too much time, too much trouble, they would start banging on the doors and going. One of those, that was one of the time when I panicked. And I also met for the first time something that I still know very little about, which was called Haganah. We were walking the streets and suddenly Germans, the closing up, the coming, the going in the house. The first reaction when the Germans were coming was to run into a doorway of a building and hide there because they were taking people from the street. So we ran into some open doorway and stood on the stairs. Suddenly, a few young men came. I think 3. Young Jewish healthy men. And they're screaming, they're going in. Upstairs. And we all ran. We were very upset, very confused. We were there illegally. We had absolutely no way of getting out of that mess. At the best, if not shoot on a stop, it meant concentration camp. So the young men started, no, upstairs, and ran with us. When we got upstairs, there was a door to a loft. It was not full height. You had to kind of go on your fours. And they were saying, hide. So we crawled behind the chimney, and it was very dusty there and dirty, and we crawled behind some chimneys and light flat as we could. I said, who are they? And they said, Haganah. I didn't have the faintest idea what Haganah was. But as far as I was concerned, we sat there. Eventually, one of them creeped out. They listened, they went, they checked. Eventually they came and said, it's okay to leave now. It was, I think the whole thing lasted 2 or 3 hours. But then was a problem, because getting out of there after dark was even more difficult because of the perimeter lights and more police and more, So we had to really get out of there as fast as we could. We didn't know whether the guy will still be there to let us through that back door in the basement or not, but we got out of there. And I really panicked. I remember that loft. I was so petrified. There were, I think all of us were about 20-odd people that ran on that loft. And I really was panic. My friend Dr. Riediger was very upset because his very good friend went to treat his patient in ghetto and happened to run into a German patrol and got shot. The Jewish people in the place, whoever else was in the place, the doctors, everybody got shot. Now, Dr. Riediger did something for me in those months that we stayed friends till the day he died. One day he took me to his house, gave me a key to his house, took me to his study, showed me a few books, told me to remember what they are. And inside were dollars and English pounds and some German marks, some Polish money. And he said, someday you may need it to buy your life. This is where it is. He lived with his brother and 4 sisters. He said, they all know that you have a key to the house and you can come here and stay here whenever you want to, and you can take whatever you want to. But I want you to know that's here. If you need to buy your life, come and get it and use it. There were terrible times after that. And again, the Germans tried very much to keep it quiet. So the realization of what is going on came on slowly. At some point, the Jewish people in the ghetto decided to fight back. The realization of what's coming came to them. In the meantime, the Germans were really keeping police, except surrounding the ghetto area, kind of quiet. They were there. There were an awful lot of uniforms, black and green, but they didn't really push the populations. They tried not to antagonize. And people really, there were rumors, but just like the rumors of concentration camps, of the exterminations, people said, oh, they're just stories. People don't do things like that to people. What was going in the ghetto in Warsaw, there were few rumors first, but nobody really believed. People always say the worst thing. It's just temporary. But then the realization came that the Jews were fighting and that they're being burned out. They're being murdered systematically. And what was incredible was the amount of flamethrowers and cannons and guns and military it took for a small, very crowded area. And eventually the smoke from the burning of ghetto became obvious to the Warsaw. There started to be rumble. People started saying, maybe we should do the same thing. Maybe we should push the German. Occasionally somebody came through the canals and told them the story, and people were very, very outraged. And the Germans had to, in addition to surrounding the whole area, which was small as far as the number of people, but it was a part of the city, so it was not a simple thing. They had to pour more police and more. They actually started using army to patrol, especially at night, Warsaw, because there was touch and go that the rest of Warsaw was going to revolt. when I went to ask some people if they knew what happened to our friends, nobody knew. Partly because of the preservation of anonymity, where people went and who was helping them, partly because of the upheaval. I never could find out whether my school friends came out of it or not. I would like to believe that at least one of them we helped, but I have no assurance of it. There were other times where I really panicked or had an attack of hysterics. But as the war progresses, I tried not to keep cool head. There are two minor things that happened which were later on to come back to me. One was I had a friend, Mieczysław Twarowski, who was an architect, who built, before the war he was an architect building, young man, beginner, building homes, schools. But during the war, like everybody else, he did whatever he could. And two guys with money decided to open a restaurant in the basement of the building in which I happened to rent at that point a room. And in that building they opened a restaurant called Chameleon. And there was food and drinks, and Poles went there more in the early afternoon, but Germans discovered the place and they went there dinner time in the evening. When Mieczysław Twarowski was decorating and building the place, he actually not only designing, but some of the work he did himself with his workmen. When he finished, the men were short of cash and didn't have the money to pay him. So they said, okay, we'll pay you half, and you have to rest for the day, and in the meantime, you can eat here for nothing. Well, he discovered that it was very slow. So his girlfriend and I, because I was the girlfriend's friend, he arranged for us to have a right to sign a check for food with his name. His name and then underneath our, and he will honor them. But we had to pay. I don't know about his girlfriend, but I had to pay him back. So I was using it very modestly, only when I really didn't have anything else to eat, because eventually I had to pay for it. But when I was hungry enough, I would go there, and I went there late one evening, sat down. It was not too far from it was alone, so I sat close to the door to the kitchen and got some reasonably inexpensive but filling dish and started eating it. And not far from me was a big German who discovered that he's going to the Russian front. It was a very unpopular, heroic endeavor for Germans at that time. So he was getting thoroughly drunk. And as he was getting drunk, his eyes happened to land on me. And he decided he wanted me to join him. So first he told the waiter to tell me to come to his table. I told the waiter, everybody in the restaurant of course knew me because of my connection with the architect and the owners through him. So I said, tell him to drop dead. But the waiter came very upset and he says, he's not giving in. It's trouble. He said, you better leave. I said, what? Leave half of my food? I'm going to finish it. It wasn't wait anymore. I was too hungry to leave half of a dish. So I started eating much faster. And the German came, grabbed me, and is pulling me to his table. There is a moment in your life when you get angry, really angry, so you quit thinking and you quit caring, and you are just angry. And I ran around and smack in a kisser. With all the mouth I had, it was a loud noise. And the German looked at me and started unpinning his revolver. At which point, by that point, the whole restaurant was looking at it. Now I smacked the German in the face in a public place. He was going to shoot me because I insulted the German Reich, the Führer, the honor of I did the worst possible thing I could. Slow animal as some occupied Pole. Somehow the waiter started talking to him and offering him a free drink and fussing about him. Another waiter grabbed me by the hand and pulled me through the kitchen, pushed me on the outside, which was the back of the restaurant and the back of on the second floor. I lived there. So I shot upstairs, got in my house, locked the door, and thought, God, this was a close one. And eventually the cook said that it took a lot of doing, and he not only got a free meal out of it and a lot of drinks, but they gave him a bottle of cognac to take with him and get rid of him, got him out. But he said he was there before, so for a little while don't show up, don't come. If you need food, let us know and we will send you a dish upstairs. Don't show up your face there. Then I had a very strange story. My uncle did business with, because of what I'm going to say about this gentleman, I'm not going to give his name. Let's call him Mr. B. With a white Russian ex-colonel whom the Germans were tried to treat the white Russian as allies. They tried to form a white Russian brigade with the German army. And although he was too old for the brigade and on a thing, however, it gave him an opening to do business. And he was doing my uncle was able to get him from Switzerland, from Sweden, from Denmark, from Germany even, some materials that he needed. He had, he was very wealthy, among other things, he had some factories. And I had to hide. So my uncle said to him, hide my niece. He said, okay, first she has to come to my house. The German won't go through the house. This is very funny because the guy was somewhere from the southern Russia, and there were a lot of Turkish people where he was. And one of the things he imported to his house was a harem room. It was a huge, huge, specially constructed couch, you know, 4 things, and Persian carpets over it, and Persian pillows, and the window had a wooden crate on it, and there were curtains, and there were things with incense there, and lots of pillows. And this became my bedroom. There was an old Russian housekeeper, spoke a little Polish, and she was cooking for him, and he had her very nice woman, which my uncle and my aunt gave her a lot of money and told her to keep good eye on her. I don't know if they realize what the guy was about, but he was fine. We sat in the morning and ate breakfast, everything was fine. Lunch was fine. As long as he stayed home, it was fine, but when he went out drinking, came back, things started getting pretty hairy. And there was a door between that harem room and I think it was his bedroom or his dressing room or something, but it had connection, I think, through a dressing room to his bedroom. There was a key in it. But I decided that I cannot insult the guy by locking myself in. However, one morning when I got up, I found out that the key was gone and my door was locked. So, an hour later, the old housekeeper came, opened the door, and he's very politely said that she thought it was better. He was drunk and it was better if I was locked. So the harem room became a real harem room and locked place. Needless to say, in a German-occupied Warsaw, the place and the situation was highly unusual in more than one respect. And eventually he decided that he could provide work for me in one of his factories. I didn't have the faintest idea what I walked into. Slowly I started getting a certain suspicion, but very slowly. One thing that drew my attention, I am of course have false identity for some, but at that time Germans were taking Poles from the street to work and camps and prisons. So everybody had to have some proof of employment. Well, I went to work there. And one day when my job became, because my fluent German, my job was working for an ex-Polish army colonel that was the in charge of the magazines. And what they were fabricating at one of the part of the plant, which allowed the plant to exist, by the way, were nets made out of cellulose, which was artificial fiber to cover German objects from air. There were nets, and then they stuck artificial grass in it, and they will cover a German object they didn't want the Allies to bomb. And what they got the cellulose from Germany. They made the nets. Then they had to dye the nets green. Then Germany will come and pick up the artificial grass and the nets and take it. And German army people were coming to do it. So I was assistant to the old colonel, who was somebody of Mr. B. He was half dead, he didn't speak German, he couldn't keep good count, so I discovered that he simply was given out of charity the job, and I was to do the job. And one of my jobs became, when the Germans came to collect the nets, like everything else in Poland, the Germans gave the cellulose by weight. When it was fabricated, we weighted the nets to the Germans. And basically, with some loss for fabrication, which was calculated, let's say, some %, they were supposed to get back what they brought. Well, the Poles very rapidly discovered that if you pour enough water on the nets, make them damp and heavy, the workers could take the string and sell it on a black market to stores and for their measly pay, because nobody made enough money to live on, especially with family. So the nets were getting progressively wetter and heavier, therefore. And I discovered that part of my job was keeping the German busy so they didn't feel the nets or get too close to the weight or anything. So I talked to them. But no honorable person got friendly with it. I was polite, but that was about it. However, I did speak German. Then, a few weeks later, after I did it with the same group of people that came, when I came back to my desk, there was a big pink box. Now, that pink box meant one thing: German bakery. There were stores just for Germans. And they have what Germans loved more than anything in the world, which they didn't get in Germany: whipped cream. Pastries, torts, and covered with whipped cream, made with butter and eggs and everything. And Poles couldn't go there. You walked there, you had some rationing cards and your German passport or military book in one hand. You got those cakes. So I opened it, and sure enough, there were cakes. I had no idea where they came from. Somehow I didn't want those German cakes. So I let people in the office have them and let it go. Next time the German came, again I had to stand outside there weighing the whole thing. Again, a box of cakes arrived. Well, people in the office were absolutely, the first bunch got cut in half and everybody got half. They were absolutely drooling, just things. And I still, this is the funniest thing. I never ate one of those goddamn cakes. I just, somehow, there was something wrong about this whole thing. And that went for a while. Flowers arrived. Never a note, never a road. I knew, of course, it had to be one of the Germans, but nobody said, they were very polite. They said, thank you and please. I was glad, because it was known that German pushed around or pinched or even hit Polish women or made very unpleasant propositions. So I was very glad that it was going. Did my job. The office was eating the cake, and that was left at that. And one day, the German came and he was very upset. And he said, I'm going to the German front. What do you say? Thanks God, maybe they kill you. I mean, it was kind of a difficult situation. So I said something, And he said, yes, I'm going. And I forgot, I managed to say something neutral, like goodbye, Of course, saying good luck would have been totally impossible, but I just said. And he left. Then one day I was working somewhere, counting stuff in a warehouse, and I heard there was a song that the British soldiers sang, that we're going to wash our laundry and hang it on the secret line. And I heard somebody whistling it. It could come nobody. I mean, this was, I didn't know who it whistled. There were 3 men in the things, and one of them had to be it. One of the men had a nice Polish name, Witkowski. Spoke very good Polish. Eventually I discovered that he was kind of friendly. I discovered that he was the whistler. Not that he was whistling this particular song, but the way he was whistling. I connected those two. We had an hour for lunch, which was kind of a wasted hour because most of the time I didn't have lunch. And the guys were playing poker. And really for pennies. I mean, literally 2, 3 cents, 10 cents was incredible, say. Equivalent, let's say, of it. And at lunch we always were playing. And I remember one especially day that one of my fellow employees said, I said, I don't have any money today. So he said, okay, we'll play together. And we're sitting together and we're betting together. He will ask me what you want to have. And he did something very embarrassing to me. As I had to go to the bathroom. I got up and he said, hurry up, I just bet your pants and for what we won't get anything. Which, in Poland it was unbelievable. You never mentioned to a young lady the fact that they ever did something like that. I mean, it was unthinkable. And the other guys were there, 2 other guys. And they were really kind of interesting, and they were making jokes, and I started having a pretty good suspicions that I was dealing with at least 4 of those men were underground. But as usual, you never asked, you never talked, you never said anything, you just kept your mouth and your suspicions to yourself, and that was it. After the war in London, one day I was walking near Harrods, and some young man was stopping in front. I tried to get around him. Usually when men try to stop me in the streets, I just don't look at them, ignore them, just get out of the way. And the guy kept on coming in the way, so eventually I lifted my face looked vaguely familiar, but he was dressed in a suit with a British thing. He had an umbrella and an attaché thing. And I said, my God, I know the guy, but this British outfit. Finally it came to me, Witkowski. He speaks Polish to me. Well, we started talking. And he said he would like to see me. He's inviting me to his house, which was just outside London, on Sunday for dinner, and he would give me the address and his name. And he says, my name is James Whitfield. So I said, what happened to Witkowski? He said, I was parachuted in Poland, and that's what I was. He was a British hundred. How well he was taught Polish, that working with him, I didn't recognize that. No accent. The only clue I had was that whistling, which eventually I connected that it was him whistling. And something about the attitude of those 4 guys. A few months later, I bumped into a Polish paratrooper in uniform. It was the other guy from that group. So with the second one, I really started saying, who else? Apparently there was 6 of them in Mr. B's outfit. Now, how safe I was there, I don't know, but it was like sitting on top of a zoo, you know. When you are hiding, that was not exactly the place to be hiding in. But eventually somebody got something out. And I had to leave that factory, and my colonel, they hired somebody else for my job. But Mr. B gave me a job in his central office. Apparently somebody asking too many questions about me. Now in the central office I had no contact with many workmen, just a few people in the office. And I didn't have any contact with public whatsoever. I worked there, I did my bookkeeping, my accounting, my all kinds, and sat there. Pretty boring job. The only good part about it was my desk was next to a window, so I could look out on the street. After a few months of working there, office boy comes and says, there is a German to see you. Now that is a paralyzing sentence. They caught up with me, somebody there. I said, how many? He said, 1. So, no way. I go to the door, and sure enough, there is a German in a field uniform, kind of dusty and dirty. At first I didn't know who he was. Then suddenly dawned on me, this is the German with the baker. Now he's coming back from the front. but which I didn't realize till after he left, and I saw everybody in the office plastering to the window. He didn't come alone. He came, his officers were shot, and he became the commanding officer of that panzer group. He came in a leading tank of a whole line of them. First he went, you see, the factory was there. He came from here, and I was here. First he went to the factory, find out that I'm not there, I work in the center office. Then he came back through the whole Warsaw to the office, left them all sitting there, and he came to say hello. He announced that the entire time on the front, all he could think was just of me, and he really loves me, and he's from Bavaria, and they are different than the Germans, and he will, if I go with him to Germany, he will see to it that I am safe. His family is going to absolutely love me. So I told him very politely that I thought he was insane, that I didn't care about his family or his things. But I think, how on earth do you expect a Polish girl to go out with a German? I mean, what are you talking about, you know? Forget it. So somehow I managed to convince. It seems like a little, but believe me, it was long. 5 minutes to convince him that it was a hopeless case. I was not interested. And he left, and then I realized what is happening outside. There were already people gathering, invasion of Warsaw, what's going on, you know. They're going to start shooting everybody. The office boy disappeared. He arrived about 10 minutes later, and he said, well, I checked. They all left. He apparently followed a German to make sure that he left. And the whole column left. And everybody thought it was great. They were taking bets how much gas, which the Germans were very short of, got burned on that trip. When they're sitting down on the street, how much it cost the German in gas, which they couldn't spare for leaving equipment in Russia. Everyone was celebrating. Well, I was less interested in the whole thing, but I found it very shocking. I was shaken up because I did not in the slightest bit encourage that. Yet it happened. Eventually, even in the place where I was working, I had to go. So I started changing identities and changing everything. Then after my arrest, it was decided that I have to go to Krakow, because in spite of, did I tell you about dyeing of my hair? No. At that point, they decided I was blonde, and they decided that my people, friends in underground, decided that I needed to change. This is one of the striking things with my blonde hair. So they said, we'll dye your hair black. And 3 fellow officers, which 1 or 2 were professional officers, and the other one was somebody from the underground. I think so, I'm not sure, because we never were sure what the other. We decided the best way to do it, they will scrunch a little bit of food, they will get the henna to dye my hair, and we'll meet at curfew hour in somebody's house. Then they will dye my hair, they will have time. We will play cards in the meantime. The scrunchy little food will make a party out of it. And that's what happened. They put that stuff on my hair. I'm going to, from blonde, be changed to black. We drank a lot, played cards, ate a little. And the next morning I took the towel off my head. Now, the thing was done after curfew when the electricity for Polish population was not available. So we used carbide lamps, which stunk, gave very poor yellow light, and were noisy. The next morning I took my towel, went to the mirror, and boy oh boy, if you don't want to draw attention, you haven't lived. I was green. My hair was ugly, dirty green. So of course, we tried washing, we tried a little bit of, somebody got a bottle of hydrogen peroxide at a great expense. Black market, nothing touched that thick. So finally they told me, you stay here, we have to go to work, we'll come in the evening. Somebody who knew a hairdresser, they're going to bring him in to save the situation, explain this. Sure enough, I was sitting there all day, alone in the apartment with my green hair. And in the evening, a man came, claimed to be hairdresser, heaven only knows what he is. He said that after looking at the hydrogen peroxide and the result, that there is only one way. Use a very strong something and bleach white, and then put some brown or blonde or some color in it, which he did. And I was white, I looked like somebody's grandmother. Then they applied some tint to it, and I had brown hair, medium brown, not black, but medium brown. He also cut my hair shorter, not till a few years back, maybe 5 or 6 years back. Unfortunately, I had that cutting out of newspaper. I carried it in my wallet. Unfortunately, it got stolen with my wallet. There was from a newspaper, interesting facts, that occasionally when you use henna for dyeing hair, it turns green. Little consolation to find out what happened to me 40 years later, I still paid the price for it because my hair started falling out. And I don't mean break, that they did anyway from all that strange things. But simply if I pulled, whatever I pulled, that came out. So I had to be very careful what I did with my hair. And that I got partial cure after the war ended in Vincent Institute in Copenhagen. My doctor tried to treat me, and hospital, finally they said, you have to go to Vincent Institute. It's a special scientific thing dealing with diseases of hair, skin, and the Vincent Institute listened to the story. They told me not to use any soap, not to wash my hair. They gave me some liquid that I could apply with the cotton and clean my hair. They gave me some medicine that I had to use daily, and I had to go every second day to Vincent Institute and get some kind of a treatment, because that very strong bleach damage the things that the hair grows out. They said after a few months going there, they told me that I'll be all right, but I am never to use permanent wave, any coloring on my hair, not wash hair more often than ever, 2-3 times a month, and use only natural soaps without any special smell. It's just ordinary cleanest. Go to the drugstore and buy clean soap. Nothing in it. Which I have to do for the rest of my life. However, I lost about half of my hair, however, what I managed to keep. But I had to be very careful with it. Just trying to think anything connects. Then I went to Kraków, where I stayed with my cousin and her husband. Her husband was kind of Prince Charming of Kraków. His father and uncle own like equivalent of San Francisco Chronicle. Kraków being smaller than Warsaw, so San Francisco Chronicle is smaller than New York Times, you know, it was the same proportion. And he was the only son, potential heir. Everybody in the city knew him. He was still a young man. Before the war, his interest in newspaper was hanging out with sports writers and going to every fancy football, baseball, basketball game or anything like that. And he got, of course, free tickets to it and went with the newspaper men and had a wonderful time, got introduced to all the things. That was about the extent of it. Then when the war broke out, his family, he was half Polish, half Yugoslavian, Serbian. His mother got caught in Serbia. His uncles went to America, or one went someplace. Anyway, Bora, at the age of 20, or 2-3 years, became the head of the family and in charge of the very luxurious place where his grandmother lived. And she was already old and disabled. They had a housekeeper, they had a man for heavy work, and they had a nurse for the grandmother, and he was in charge of it. Then he married my cousin. She went there. Eventually, when I had to suddenly leave Warsaw, I was going to stay with them for a while till they could find a... I needed, of course, new papers, among other things, and till I got new papers and they found a safe place for me to stay, I was going to stay with them. The one thing was that their apartment was large and in a very nice place. It was one of the best places in the whole city of Kraków. So the Germans didn't want to throw the old lady out, but they took half of the apartment and gave it to a German who was a civilian, who was taken to the army, and he was in charge of the railroads for that district, and which was a military job. But he basically was not a military person or police or anything. And he, I must say that he behaved probably as well as a German could. He never made any noise, he never made any demands. He was very polite to the old lady. He didn't bother my cousin or me or anybody. So he got tolerated, and old Mrs. Dobija got to stay in her place. And we had to kind of exist with him. I don't think he would have been very happy if he knew that he was hiding somebody, but he didn't know, so what you don't know. In Krakow, my situation has changed. First of all, I found myself away from the group of people I was working with. And I have to say in my favor that when the word got out that the Gestapo had me in Aleja Szucha in their interrogation, some of the people ran away. But my closest friends announced that the Germans are stupid, they're going to hit me. Once they hit me, I will get stubborn. When I get stubborn, I won't say a word. That was it. And because of their stupidity, they're not going to get anything, and they refused to move or hide or do anything, just stayed where they were, totally convinced that there was no way the Germans are going to get anything out of me. But in Krakow, although I got some recommendation to go back to work, I wasn't doing anything. I got to sit on suitcases full of parachutist brought bounty, which were dollars in gold and diamonds, few guns, blank papers for documents, false stamps, stuff that if they was found with me, I would have been tortured in the worst way, but I actually never did anything. Or if I did something, it was retyping some stuff for London, which once in a while proved to be an extremely trying thing, because theoretically, if there were results of what Germans did to be sent to London of somebody you knew, theoretically you were not supposed to do it. But once in a while the system didn't work. And you didn't realize. You would type about the months of torture and interrogation and what was applied and what was done, and then suddenly on page 39 you discovered that there was something there let you know that you knew the person, which was shouldn't have happened, but it did happen. And from very active role, I found myself totally passive and very restless. In the meantime, also there was another time where I panicked, which was very embarrassing. One of my brother's friends came to visit me in Krakow. And he had some kind of a supply business, did some business with Germans, which 99% whoever wanted to exist had to some way do it, which gave him truck and gasoline, main of all gasoline. So he came with his driver to Krakow, and I saw him a few times, and then he decided he wanted, well, he ate a few times in Bora's house, so he decided he has to ask us out. So Bora, a friend of his, my cousin, a friend of my brother, his driver, I forgot if there was somebody else. Could have been another person. I know it was a whole bunch of us. No, I think that was it. And he found out from Bora that in the suburbs of Krakow, it's mountain district. So there are rivers and there are, what is that fish, that sport fish you cut in a... Trout. So we went to a place where Bora knew he knew some little innkeeper that would give us trout. Now that was, so they got some vodka on a black market. We all loaded to the truck and went in the mountains. I remember this was very funny because the innkeeper came, got a bucket, got a fishing rod, and left. He said, dinner in an hour. And dinner in an hour. And he had more than enough trout for everybody. I don't know whether during the war people didn't have time to fish or what, but we had all fried trout and some potatoes and some salad, a lot of vodka, and we had a very good time. Then the good time and the vodka was I think, undoing, because we were very noisy. And on the way back, as we entered Krakow, German police stopped us, military police. And he said, we are going to go to the military police barracks. So we had to, they got a couple of Germans with us, and we had to go truck and all. They were wondering how come we were, it was too late to say it wasn't a pleasure. We were too noisy. We smelled of liquor a mile around. This was obviously, we had a trip in the country. So Bora very smartly started bribing, which worked. But while we were standing there, for some reason, a big sergeant in the police pinned himself on me. And he kept on demanding my papers and kept on looking at it, and he kept on asking me and whom I am in the party related to. And we, of course, in the situation when you stopped like that, except for Bora and my cousin, which were married, and their nobody was anybody's relative, because if one of us falls, don't want to pull the rest of it. But that German really, and I lost my nerve. I just couldn't take it. After my experience in a Paviak prison and what I saw there, and the people that were tortured, that couldn't even walk or get up because they were so beaten up, my nerves gave out. And my nervousness got the German more suspicious. His picking on me made me more nervous, so it was a hopeless situation. And finally I said to Bora, I said, I can't do it. So he said, okay, it's going to be trouble, but go. And at one point, he started arguing with the German, and the driver got on, and he started arguing with the German, and while they were all arguing, I just oozed out. Which was good for me. However, I had to go where I live, where I was sitting on 2 suitcases of dynamite. I didn't know whether the German would remember the address or the name from what he saw. I had the document with me, but he saw it. He could have remembered, if not the name, the address. So I went to some friend's house, waited, and I got hold of Bora. Bora went, retrieved the suitcases. I got in touch with the underground, told them that I am for a while not going to be home. They have to get the suitcases someplace else because I don't have a place. I didn't want to leave them with Bora that just went through that routine. Apparently the German was very furious that I disappeared. But Bora gave him enough money to, plus my friend, they gave them enough money to. As things got, we had some food, because just money, I don't know would have done it, but they had bought some eggs and butter and piece of salted pork in the country, and we were bringing it back to the city, so that somehow we got rid of the Germans. But I was seeing that my nerves were not what they should be, that I was able to be totally cool and detached. Now I'm beginning to feel wear and tear, and I'm losing it, so to speak. Then there was few other people got arrested in the underground. So getting back to the underground was even more difficult because they were all running and hiding, and they were not, at that time they were so busy covering tracks that they were not ready to reopen the door for me or send me to a new place or anything. Everybody was too busy hiding. And then the Russian army started coming, and we went to the first step was when the Russian army started pushing. Warsaw was already surrounded by the Russians. However, they didn't make a move to help Warsaw. The army was not only on the suburb of Prague, but they were actually surrounding almost Warsaw. And they still didn't move. They let the Germans just pound and finish the Poles, because it was in the Russian interest to get the Polish people destroyed, especially the ones that were fighting Germans, because they were likely to fight the Russians. And after a while in Krakow, I felt like I was isolated from life, from people. I couldn't get out much, couldn't be in touch with people. It was one person typhoid levy. It wasn't safe for me to get in touch, and it wasn't safe for them to be in touch with. So I told my mother, let's go east. And at this point, the Germans said, we are opening the border from Poland to Germany for anybody that will volunteer for work in Germany. We need people to work. Then we can take the Germans out of the factory, and the Germans can go and fight the Russians and whoever else, British, Americans, and Poles can work in ammunition factories or whatever. So we signed up. My mother, after very negative approach in the beginning, decided that there's one thing I should have said, that in 1939, when the war broke out, around 1940, early 1940, my uncle realized what was going on, and he went to the Foreign Office and asked them to give visa to his nieces and nephews that were in a school age. And since schools were closed, there was no schooling in Poland, his nieces and nephews, which were from 7 years to 17, were still in a school age. If the Danish government gave them visas, at that time Denmark was neutral, he will pay for the boarding schools, for the schools, his family will help, he will provide us. All he needed is for us to get entry visa, he will provide the exit visas. And we can, this way he can save at least the children and the family. Well, it worked the other way. When Gestapo got the application for the exit visas, the paradox was that the Danish consulate in Warsaw was tepid on the Germans. There were some that, it's a neutral country still. They don't like Germans, but they're not that bad. They are Aryans, the blonde. You know, there wasn't that much antipathy. And the Danish consulate in Berlin was very solid anti-German, 100%. So he had to apply for visas for us, exit visas from the Germans in Warsaw. But the minute the Gestapo heard that there is a bunch of kids that have visa to neutral country, they decided they want those kids. They make good hostages. So instead of getting exit visa out of Poland, that was the first time we had to change papers. We had the Germans chasing us to grab us to see what was so good about those kids that they were to be allowed to leave the heavenly German Reich for Denmark. So the visa sat there in a foreign office. They were never given to anybody, and we were hiding, my younger cousin and I. Not all of us made it. Then, in Krakow, during the Warsaw Uprising, I was going totally bananas. I wanted to go back to fight with my friends. But there was a cordon of Germans around Warsaw that you couldn't get through. I went from south, from west, a little bit from northwest. No way, never got near within miles of the front or Warsaw. They were just, the Germans had it isolated and they were letting the Russians finish off the Poles. So I went back to Krakow. Also, Warsaw wasn't taken, but south and north of Warsaw, the Russians were already entering. We could hear in Krakow the Russian guns day and night. They were already entering South Poland and North Poland. They only left Germans in charge of destroying what was left of Warsaw. And that's when I told my mother that I have had it with the Russians, with the Germans. The next time we are going to go west till we get occupied by the British or the Americans. I said, haven't tried. I'm ready to try American and English occupation. My mother was very reluctant, but finally he decided, my aunt and my cousin Eric Mittensen, they were all in Denmark. My other aunts were reasonably. One was in Israel, one was hiding in Krakow with help of Bora Dobija, so it was reasonably safe. Finally, my mother decided that my brother was in England, she was coming too. So we went and signed up for the labor in Germany, and we made our destination such that we absolutely had to go through Berlin. And we got to Berlin. We asked for stopover and went to the Danish embassy. My mother phoned us. The first time my mother phoned, my uncle said, "We are in Berlin, get us out to Denmark." My uncle was delighted. He said he would send the visas for us. Now you have to understand, he was a Dane and not speaking very well Polish. Also he was absent-minded. Also all the Czarnowski, Góralski, Kapuściński, whatever, sounded the same to me. So my mother visa came all right. However, my visa came with the previous name, which the Gestapo was looking after me. So it's totally unusable. My mother didn't know what to do with me. Now we knew that every word is absolutely listened to when you talk from one country to another in Germany. So my mother said, "You do what you want with it." So I phoned my uncle. Now the conversation I thought that he will have one of his better days. The conversation went, I said, you know, your secretary Charnowski? Yeah, yeah. So I said, okay, she is dead. You have new secretary. Her name is Guralski. And I am yelling, you know, long distance with Gestapo listening. Thanks God he caught on it. So in the meantime, we are sitting in Berlin, which is bombed by American Air Force, blanket bombing. My husband, one of them, B-52s, you know. And we are sitting in a hotel with some very fuzzy documents, with our 48 hours to stop over on the way to labor has expired. Now, it's bad practice when you are in a place where there is police checks out, and all hotels are, to sit in a hotel room, because you immediately become suspicious. So you have to leave. So I decided, okay, I have to leave, I have to leave. I had a little story prepared that I am Volksdeutsche. That means, you know, I lived in Poland, that's why if I have an accent or something, explain to it, and here I go, no documents, no nothing. Now, where are they going to look for me? Places where people hide. So I decided to go to the places people don't hide. I went to Wannsee, which was kind of a resort in Berlin. I went to the zoo. It was terrible. The animals were starving. The housewives were coming and feeding potato peels to tigers, you know. It was terrible. And I finally ran out of everything. And I always heard about Hotel Adlon. Hotel Adlon was the best hotel in Berlin, and that's where international people were, and that's where all the Gestapo went, and Himmler, and Goering, and everybody. So where are they going to look for a refugee? Not in a Hotel Adlon. So I went and sat down to have lunch in Hotel Adlon. I didn't have enough coupons, but there were things you could have without coupons or very little coupons. I think something as exciting as carrot soup and, I don't know, even bread and butter you had to have. I had very little. But anyway, they gave me something. They gave me ersatz coffee made out of heavens know what. Everything was ersatz, and I got the dish, but I was sitting there looking around me at all the Gestapos, all the place in the war. That's what the German politics. Where they were not likely to run around and ask for IDs. Who are you? Was there? That's what they're going to ask all those you know, dignitaries that were there. They obviously were not, and the very few foreigners were people from legations and so on. Actually, they avoided going there because it was well known that the waiters and everybody else, you know, the people that took your coat if you had any, or they were all Gestapo, so they would look through your attaché case and listen on your conversation. So actually very few people except the German so-called elite went there. So I figured out that's one place and they're not going to chase people. And I was tired of it. You couldn't sit too long in a park. You could only sit as long as it was likely for a... I was too young to be a retired person, so I should be working. So I was safe on a bench in a park for 3/4 of an hour. That was lunchtime. The rest of the time I had to be someplace. I wasn't supposed to be on the streets. Well, eventually we got the word that the visas have arrived. And now we can ask for exit visas, exit permits, because the visas are in the names. There's little difficulty there, and a bribery started to coming into. By the way, I have an answer for you with the briberies, because I couldn't answer you before about how much did it cost to buy good false documents. I didn't know how to translate it, because depending on who you bribed, he wanted it in dollars, or gold dollars, or diamonds, or German marks, or, you know, Spanish money, or sometimes even South American money. So the way I could only answer you that the good documents cost what at least a year or year and a half of average living. That means not top of the line, but enough to have a place to live, eat, repair your clothes for a year or year and a half, maybe even 2 years. That's the only way I can translate it, because depending what they ask for. If they ask for what kind of a payment, the Gestapo got very choosy. They didn't even take dollars, because the Germans were flooding. You know that the German Abwehr is intelligent. Were paying with false dollars. So the Germans didn't want dollars. They were never sure whether they were right or wrong. So they would only take dollars and gold, which were hard to obtain. Or Swiss franc in gold or something like that, or diamonds. But the diamonds create also a little problem. They had to take it someplace to be looked at. Now the people that were giving diamonds didn't want to let go of them. So that created a problem. So there was difficulty in paying off. Occasionally the Germans became, especially Gestapo, they became, towards the end of the war, that they could tell a real diamond from not. They became somewhat expert at bribery. So finally the papers have come, the visas came to fit the papers we had. And the Gestapo said that they wanted to see us. Well, the Danish embassy started making noise about it, you know, kind of an insult. What, we are a Royal Danish Embassy, what you guys think you're doing So they decided this is going to be a social occasion. We're going to go to somebody's house, my mother and I, and one or two people from the, definitely one, people from the Gestapo and a couple of people that were helping us are going to be there. And we came there, and they, of course, the people that were arranging the whole thing provided food and drinks, all black market. And a young blonde Gestapo person arrived. Trust my luck, he'd just been in Spain. He was his first trip to Spain, and he went bananas about Spain. Wonderful country. The music, the dances. He actually got some cabaret dancer teaching him flamenco. So we drink and drink and drink, and he finds some records, some kind of a Spanish movement. He's drunk enough, he wants to dance flamenco. So in Bonn, Berlin, with interruption of false air raids, that means they were coming, then the planes will pass Berlin or go off. So before anybody managed to get to the cellars, by the way, getting to cellars in Berlin during the war was compulsory. It wasn't so much the well-being, but was the fact they were safe that people would signal. This was a prevention, you know. Of course it was easier when they didn't have to dig sick and dead people, but nevertheless the main reason was not to leave anybody, especially in hotels, because they could signal to the Allies. So the guy's getting pretty smashed, and he says that I'm going to dance flamenco with him. Well, I was the only person available. My mother excused herself, and I was it. So in Berlin, I took a record, because I didn't have a fan, and fanning myself with a record, I danced flamenco with him, you know, and looking at him above the record. And it was, you know, unreal scene, really. On and off false alarms. The music, this crazy Gestapo man, you know, with his flamenco passion, drunk as a skunk, and me doing the best I could in the situation. And somehow we passed the master, flamenco dancers and all. He decided that it was okay to give us visa. And that's now I miss my passport. If I ever find them, I may let you photograph them unattached. The Gestapo man says, okay, you can go and pick up your passports and your visas. So we get the passports. This is a German Nansen passport, basically. And we go, and there comes the moment when he has to give us description. And I have to give him my birth certificates. My mother's were very good. Mine, done very short time before, at the pressure, were not so good. So they were false. They were not real documents, but they were just totally made up. And Germans, especially in the Gestapo, were pretty good at it. So we go there, and there is this German, fairly young guy in uniform. I was kind of surprised because most of the young at that time were at front, but I guess Gestapo was a good place not to go to front. And I stand there, present my documents. My mother already checked out and left. We are, of course, not related. We don't even know each other. And I look at him and I say, don't look at the documents, look at me. Don't look at the, inside. And he says, hair, dark brown, his eyes. What color are your eyes? I said, I don't know. So he looks in my eyes and he says, well, the blue. No, maybe the gray. And I say, don't look at the papers, look at me. And I look at him, smile, and, look him straight in the eye. So finally the guy writes down, blue, gray, green. So the whole line under my photograph with my description is filled out with the blue, gray, green eyes. Finally, I get my passport, we get visas to Denmark. From then on, clear sailing. We go, we buy first-class tickets on a train that goes on a boat, the whole plane, and goes through Jutland to Denmark. We drive through Denmark, they're checking our papers, they're checking things. Then there is the last checkout point. Once we leave there, we are over the border to Denmark. Now, Denmark is neutral, but they are very close to Sweden. There are also the showplace to show the world that the Germans can't treat occupied countries in a good way. So they don't show as much muscle there. And the last check, two Gestapo men come, two of them. And one of them looked at other passport, looked at my mother passport, checked her out, and then comes to me. And he looks at my passport and holds it. Look at visas. They always flip their finger where the photographs were to check if they are reattached or something. No matter how well you try it, there's a stamp that goes on the photographs and on the passport. No matter how hard you try it, it's just about impossible when you reapply to realign this whole thing, no matter what you do. So he kind of checks it out and looks at the passport, looks at the visa. Then he finished looking at the visas. And he still looks at my passport on the front page. And I'm beginning to sweat it, What is so fascinating? And then he said, I always spoke, there was a big risk, but I always spoke German to the Germans because I was the Danish national coming back to Denmark, but I don't speak a word of Danish. So I figured out, knowing the Germans, that they said the whole world has to speak German, I just spoke German to them and hoped it will never occur to them to ask me anything in Danish, which they never did. It worked fine, the German attitude. And the guy looks at it, finally he looks at me and he says, how long did he look in your eyes? Just, handed me my passport and left. But that was the only remark he made. So I knew that he noticed the whole line of description there. He didn't know the reason though. And the train left Denmark, went on a boat. We got through Jutland, we got back to Copenhagen, and there it was incredible. Suddenly we are in a city, there are lights, there are people laughing, there are women wearing hats, makeup and fur coats, jewelry on the street. People are chatting with each other. There are neon signs. I mean, the place is just unbelievable. And Uncle Ivar got us off the plane, and just right outside the Copenhagen main train station is the famous Tivoli Gardens. And in the famous Tivoli Gardens was the best Danish restaurant there is. And there was a beautiful table decorated with red and white, which are Danish colors, which also happen to be Polish colors. There was during the war in Denmark, there was a Danish flag on one end of the table and a little Polish flag on the other end of the table. And there was my cousin, my aunt, my mother, I forgot who else. But we were sitting, and we get served a slice of salmon on a white bread with butter. Then we get a cocktail out of shrimp. Then we get some kind of a veal cutlet baked in cream and mushroom, wine with it. Of course, Uncle insists that we drink a glass of aquavit with the shrimp and the thing, the salmon. Then there is a dessert, which is whipped cream, chocolate, heavens know what. At this point, and first of all, women, dressed, perfume, jewelry, laughing, fur coats, people are friendly, you know. It was like coming out of heavens nowhere. I forgot. I simply forgot what it was. So strange, so foreign to me, that dark, miserable, cold, worn-out clothes, people slinking around the wall, looking over their shoulders, who's coming to get them. That was normal. This wasn't. You know, I was totally, you know, out of it. Thanks God that Uncle Ivar talked us into a few glasses of Danish aquavit, because I think this has made it possible not to really. Then we went to their home, which was very beautiful. And there again, there were a couple of cook and a maid. So when somebody said, I want a glass of water, I started getting up. My aunt said, no, press the button. A maid dressed out in a white frilly things over a black dress came and served the water. And the word was unreal. And then Uncle did a very smart thing. The first thing he did within literally 2-3 days after our arrival, he hired a young student, actually a docent or assistant or something, from the Danish department to teach my mother and me Danish. Because that situation of Danes re-arriving in Denmark and not speaking a word of Danish was really uncomfortable. So every day we had an hour of Danish, except for weekends. Now, weekend in Denmark, you haven't lived. You think that weekend is big in England. You should try Denmark. Weekend, they call it. And the city is dead. The stores are open for 2-3 hours in the morning. All the streetcars from Friday afternoon start running on a reduced schedule. If you want to buy a loaf of bread or a pint of milk, you have to hop in a taxi or in a streetcar and go to the central train station where is a little place that sells newspapers and cigarettes, and if you're lucky then you can buy a pint of milk or something for your coffee. It's totally dead. Everybody goes to the little places in the country. And when I say little, I mean little. Those little cabins on the seashore are the size of a closet. And they go there and they open all the door, and that extends it a little bit, and there is basically almost no room for anything else but some double trunk beds or something. And they have a tiny, the whole place with a garden can be the size of this room. Half of it garden, half of it the thing. And there they put, in front of the building, they put a couple of chairs and sit and look at the ocean. That's their weekend in the country. Houses are right next to each other. But, of course, very wealthy people have larger places and they have boats and things. But the joy of it is that those little weekend houses, even working family people have them. So that isn't only for rich people to go, but everybody goes there. And I had to learn new attitude with life and approach to people and everything. And one sad thing was that first there became a concern that too many people were living there, that we made low interest. So a room was rented for me in a house of a Danish widow. She had two daughters. One was 6 or 7 years, and one was young teenager, probably 13, 14 years old. And I don't know if you remember from the war, but at one point the British decided to bomb Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen. Well, the Germans always expected that sooner or later their headquarters would be bombed. So they made the two top floors of the building, Dagmar House in Copenhagen, the jail for prisoners. And the Gestapo, all the cells and all the, not cells, but all the interrogation rooms and the offices and the top Gestapo people and everybody, they were all below the prisoners. So the way the British did it, they did not use bombers, but they used mosquito fighters with bombs. And I saw it. I was in my house. And the literally flew by street. There was overcast, low overcast clouds. And they came out of the clouds, and the zero of the was one thoroughfare this way and the other thoroughfare this way. And on a corner was the Gestapo house. And they came out of the clouds, the zero on this main thoroughfare, and very low. So you could see the marking, you could see the plane, you could see everything. So instantly that the plane and the alarm to hide came at the same time. And they flew along the street. When they came to their other intersection, they were dumping their bombs. And they did, and they were shooting them under on the second and third floor, which was another 2 floors below the prisoners. So they didn't have any prisoners, they just, and of course there was a mess, and most of the prisoners got out in the whole thing. But there was one horrible thing happened. One of the plane hit something, some aerial or something, and fell short of the destination. Now, only the leading pilot was supposed to place the bombs in the right place. The rest of them went after the leader and dumped it in the same place. When the plane that hit something fell, some of the pilots think that's it and dumped the bombs there. And those bombs, because they didn't want to collapse the building with the prisoners or so, were incendiary bombs, so that they will have time to get the Danish underground, of course, knew of it, and they were ready to get the prisoners out. So they had time before the building burned to get the prisoners out. The incendiary bomb were placed right, and most of the planes dumped their bombs on the Gestapo building, and the way they shoot them. But the one plane that fell, at least two of the mosquitoes put their bombs there. What the plane fell off was the French school. It was a very large building, Catholic school for girls. Hundreds and hundreds of girls. And the girls, of course, were herded to the basement because of the air around. And the incendiary bombs started burning. And I don't know how many, I forgot, but several hundred of the girls from different ages were killed there, and nuns, but mostly children, some nuns. The worst thing was that the building collapsed on the burning, and they could get air and water to them, and they were slowly burning, but they couldn't get them out. So finally they pumped milk with some anesthetic, so the children would die and not would burn alive with the nuns. And both daughters of my landlady, the 14-year-old Bente and the 6-year-old Karen, were killed. That's very beautiful children, especially the little one. And the little one took upon herself to teach me to speak Danish. Every time I pronounced something, she didn't speak German, so we had only one language. So the few words that I knew, if I pronounced something wrong, she'd look at me and she would say it in a proper way. And she would keep at me till I said it right. She was my major source of pronunciation in Danish. She kept on teaching me, and she would go to a room and say in Danish, table, lamp. And if I said it wrong, she would keep at me till I got it right. It was a very shattering experience. The sad part about it, that Mrs. Jensen, the mother of the two girls, really went to It's all she had. She went to pieces. She started drinking and her whole behavior went. She was just crushed. She was not a normal person after that. Especially it hit her hard when the reasonably short time afterwards the war ended. I mean, considering the length of the war before that, that's towards the end of the war. And it was very hard too, because those were allies, those were the people the Danes waited for. And it was an attack that went wrong. It was nobody's fault, but killed hundreds of children. And in the meantime, I had other teachers. The janitor in the building where my aunt lived and his son were teaching me intensively to practice my Danish. The 17-year-old son of the janitor decided to teach me ride a bike, because everybody in Denmark rides a bike, so I had to do it. If I was to be Danish, I had to know how to ride a bike. And we thought we'll make it, we'll last through the war. However, later on, there started to be, the janitor said, and some man came and asked about the people that visited Ivar and his family. Who are those people? Where they come from? And when something like that happens, you know, it's trouble. Regardless whether the person speaks Danish or German or whatever, when they start asking, who are you, where are you from, look out. Now at this point I have to say something. I'm very fond of Denmark, and they gave me terrific help during the war and after the war. They were very generous with me in many ways. However, on a whole, Poland was called the country without a christening. On a percentage per capita, Denmark had many people that will inform or cooperate with Germans or the Gestapo. Partly because Germans were somewhat close, you know, they were sharing a border, they were on the border of Jutland and Denmark. There were many families that were mixed. Some of it was attitudes. Germans have treated them much better than they treated other occupied countries, so they really didn't see the worst out of it. The other thing too was that Polish people and things were not close to them at all. So this is where again both my mother and my aunt freaked out. The Germans are going to drag us out, kill us out. I was indifferent, but I was still on my plan. I'm going west, far enough to meet the British and the Americans. I was still heading in the right direction. So my aunt and my mother decided we are going to escape with the help of the underground from Denmark to Sweden. Well, I was still heading out of now really neutral country, and I was still going where I wanted to go. So I said, okay. So there is a very unusual group of people. Somewhere along that time, now this is towards the very end of the war, somebody who was high party member help in obtaining the exit visas. He was paid for it, but he also didn't believe with what was going around. And somewhere in that time, things got hot for him in Germany. So he took his girlfriend, which was Croatian, and came to Denmark and told Aunt Oliver, I help you get out, your family, now you help me to get out. He was sitting someplace in a reasonably safe hotel, but nevertheless he was scared to go back to Germany because some of his activities were discovered or under suspicions. So he wanted his girlfriend and him to be gotten out of Denmark to Sweden. That's where he felt he could feel safe. So there is this group. German with his Croatian girlfriend. My uncle in the meantime got out of Poland, a son of a very famous restaurator, the only person of that family who was, the father and the mother got killed, but the son was still alive, and my uncle promised that he would take care of him. His brother, nobody knew where he was. The kid was 16 years old, 15, 16 years old. He was a big kid, he was much bigger than I was, but he was a child. And he suspected that his brother got out of Poland to England and was somewhere in the army. But he didn't know for sure. So my uncle had him, and he was scared because he didn't, also came kind of a strange way very recently to Denmark. And all those strange people showing up from nowhere and my mother and I and my aunt, we are going to Sweden with the help of Danish underground. Uncle was very opposed to it. Told my mother, just sit quiet, the war is ending, they won't touch you, we have enough pull here, but the two ladies, as far as they were concerned, they were already 1 foot in a grave. They was not going to take it. So, underground is contact, my uncle is bitching about it. He is not going, his son Eric is not going. They are staying. But aunt, my mother, me, that young kid, and those two Germans, we all are going. So, there came people and look at us. And one young man keeps on looking at me. And I discovered that he was called Tom, which I instantly knew that he wasn't any Tom ever in his life before. I mean, it was so, it was, to me, it was all visible. And the people all were listening, and he was in charge of the operation. The next day, we are just going to take very little. Basically, what you see on that picture, carry case in that picture is a change of underwear or something, and we are going to Sweden. We are not going where there is a 20 minutes between Helsingborg and Helsingør. That's where Hamlet has his thing. 20 minutes, nothing. But there are Germans by the zillion there watching not only the water, but the beaches and everything around. So we are going to sail from Copenhagen with a fisherman to Malmö. from Malmo we're going to go to Stockholm. They take us the following day, come and get us. Always hush hush. I see them observing, not calling themselves, not talking to each other, observing, oh, security. Different person takes us from one place to another, then from that place to another. We taking private car, taxi, you name it. Oh, I can see, I know the routine, I can see it, and I watch it very calmly. Some of it, I thought it was not very sophisticated, but, I thought maybe I'm too blasé. Finally, we get, this begins to be dangerous now. At night, any place near water or where a boat can be, it's pretty much watched by the Germans. But somehow we get to the boat, we all load to the boat. We have to be not a word, no smoking, no noise carries some water. You can hear a person speaking in a boat when it's quiet at night for miles, so nobody, nothing. And we sail and sail and sail. Finally we get near to Malmo. The fisherman says, well, we are now within a mile of the shore, so we are safe. And we can see street lights and people walking in Malmo. This is Malmo, that's Malmo. You can smoke. Everybody's so delighted that we sing a Danish drinking song. We are sailing up to the island very loudly. We sail up you and we are all going to. And we are literally, if you could jump, you could swim. It's that close. The water was very quiet. It wasn't a very thing. Suddenly, hell breaks loose. Lights, halt, we are shooting. German boat which is totally wrong. They were not allowed to do it. They are parked right in the territorial Swedish water, breaking all the rules of the game, waiting for people like us. And the sailors have machine guns, they give a shot around outside the boat, and they are serious. My mother and aunt say we would throw our money and our jewelry in the ocean and we will jump and commit suicide. We cannot be taken by the Germans. I don't know, there must be something beyond reason, because basically that was a reasonable thing to do in those situations. Because they're going to know why we were so anxious to get out of Denmark. So they're going to interrogate, and nobody wants Gestapo interrogation. But you develop something. I said, no, there's always time for that. One way or another, there's always just, we're going to jump in the water. I said, no. They're going to shoot. They're not going to kill you, but you will have wounds on yourself and make them hurting you and interrogating you that much easier. If you were sure that they will shoot to kill, but they're not. We are too close. The lights are on. They can just shoot on your legs. Don't do it. And I overruled everybody. So now the motley group gets taken to a Navy brig on land, The first thing I did, I walked around the wall and sure enough, drilled holes. So I pulled my mother out and in her ear said, there are listening devices. Watch what you're saying. Everybody's talking to everybody, what shall we do, and so on. They said, I tell you what story I'm going to have. I say, don't tell anybody anything. Just have your own story, don't worry about anybody else. The poor kid is green and is shaking, which he has a good reason to be, because he's one way leg in Sweden, finds himself in a jail, which was a novel experience, and he's a young kid. The worst scared is the Gestapo guy, the German. I don't know whether he was SD or whatever he was, but he was some kind of a fish someplace. And he is petrified, with a good reason. Well, when the Germans discovered that they got one German and one Horvat woman that worked for the Germans in some kind of a high-class Berlin office, they immediately separate them from us. Immediately. Then they started interrogating, but the naive interrogation was kind of, they just wanted to know, you know. And I decided that I'm going to tell them the story that they would like to hear. The question is why, being in Denmark, I have to escape to Sweden. Now the Germans always thought that anybody that was not German was a whore, a prostitute, a bitch, a horrible person, the worst scum. So I told them what they want to hear. So I told them that I came to Denmark, but I didn't speak, which I didn't at the point, very well Danish. I had an accent. And the Danes suspected me of being German, and they wouldn't talk with me. I wanted to find a boyfriend, nobody would have anything to do with me. The going was slim. I couldn't find a boyfriend, I couldn't find a job. They were ostracizing me. So I decided that Sweden being neutrals, maybe I find a boyfriend in Sweden. Now that story they believed. That was in the line of their sin. If I was saying I was poor innocent, something they would never believe. But a juicy story that I was looking for a liaison with somebody and couldn't get it, that was believable. I don't know what my aunt and my mother told them at that point. But my mother had a lot of jewelry. One was a very large diamond, absolutely clear. And my mother always said that she's going to save it for after the war, to get something, you know, either restart the factories or restart the life, you know, have some money for after the war. Somehow, when we researched, they of course found the diamonds in her jewelry, and aunt had another sack full of jewelry. So they found them, and the Gestapo, I think, used a very clever method. They knew they lost the war. Now, this is a matter of, you know, so they used a very clever pressure to say to my mother that for enough something they could see to it that we were not killed. And she fell for it, and she gave them the jewelry. My aunt didn't, but she also had an uncle that, you know, was in the foreign service, so she just hang on to her jewelry. But my mother gave them the jewelry to what she claimed is to buy our lives. I don't think it had anything to do, because it was, the Germans couldn't even transport prisoners safely from Denmark to Germany, and they did not have concentration camp in Denmark. There was one prisoner camp, but it was Boy Scouts camp, not a prison, you know, it was nothing. But the really bad places, they had to transport the Danish prisoners to Germany to, and they were, you know, trying to save their skins. So this lady, scared, with sack full of jewelry, came right in their hands. And they knew how to do it, how to terrorize people, how to interrogate them, so they did. We were taken to prison, which, well, first we were interrogated there. This is something that I think is funny. There was a chair like that, about this size, and everybody wanted to talk to me, and talking there with those holes in microphone was exactly the last thing I wanted to do. Lady, don't ask me how I do it, but I curled up on that size chair and went to sleep. I put my nose and my knees together and on the side. How I did it, I don't know, but that was the only way to stop people on telling me how they're going to lie to the Germans, with the Germans listening to it, which I was convinced that was going on. So I just curled up, and in the morning some more, the Navy interrogation came. After a couple of hours, Gestapo came and hauled us off to Dagmarhus, which is equivalent of Aleja Szucha in Poland, where people were taken. We were taken to Dagmarhus. We were then taken to, there we, forgot how long we were there. But again, that was different country. End of the war, the Germans and the Gestapo were already scared, so it was. And then eventually we were taken to Västra Fängelse, where I landed in a cell with Louisa, and they put another woman. We called her I don't know English name for it. It's an insect that crawls on your body, and when you're dirty.
Lice.
Lice. We call her a lice. And we were pretty good about it. Now apparently she was put there to see what we will talk about. What later came out, much later, probably after the war, or maybe, that the Gestapo knew that Aunt Hela had problems, but she was still protected. My mother knew she was lying, her story was flimsy. The one person that they were not sure of was my flaky story about looking for a boyfriend. They couldn't find it. That was in line what non-Germans were like, and that they believed, more or less. But I was in a wrong group of people. In a jail, the mentality of the jail is unbelievable. All the stories that I read about what goes in jails, like San Quentin, San Quentin 5 and so on, the information, the prisoners treating other prisoners. Your mentality when you are in jail changes completely. You quit thinking like a normal person. You are a jailbird. Your mentalities of a jailbird, your attitudes, everything is different. It's amazing how it changes a person. And this Laos, we smelled her, Louisa and I, when I talked a little bit. First, my entry to the cell. When I entered there, I realized that I am in Danish jail with Danish people inside. So in my broken Danish, I said, I don't speak very well Danish, but I'm not German, I'm Polish. That was my first sentence out of my mouth. And then, of course, with the guards, I had to speak German because they didn't speak Polish, and my Danish, and they didn't speak Danish either. So Louisa was about the best person I could sit in jail with. She was a lady. And she immediately, when I started talking, kind of looked at the Laos, and I knew that I should be careful what I'm saying. So we only talked to each other more openly when she was out for some reason or she wasn't there. We suffered with her for a few weeks. Eventually the German decided it didn't work. We didn't confide our dearest secrets to her, so they got her out. And the staying in the prison was very much different of what experience with jail or Gestapo or everything was. There were, I think, 2 women that needed, out of 130, there were 2 women that had problems walking, but I don't know whether it was Gestapo beating or they were in an whether there was actually torture or what it was. They needed, when we went to the bathroom, which was 3 times a day, and along the walks, there sat a German on a chair, man of course, and he would, where we prisoners are not supposed to talk to each other, so when you came close to the opening, he would say, rechts frei, links frei, and pointed where you were supposed to do so that you didn't meet with another prisoner and exchange some information. And that is also when I started getting very ill, because somewhere along the line, either in the Navy or the Gestapo, I got that rotten fish. And I got prescribed by the veterinarian special food, which happened to be more than enough for Louisa and me. And eventually the pipeline started working. We had things here and there. One of the things we had that, according to the Gestapo, the German killed himself, committed suicide. According to the Danish prisoners, the German hung him. I guess they were so disgusted that somebody that was high in the German hierarchy betrayed them, that they couldn't wait to get him to Germany too. And they were afraid probably that they won't get him to Germany, so they hung him. The woman got separated from all other prisoners. Eventually, I think she survived, but I'm not sure. I never knew about her or anything, but I never heard that she was killed. And it was again too late to transport her to Germany or any place. the young kid somehow managed to stay. He was very young and very frightened, and he kind of announced, which was smart, that he just went along for the ride because the person that was taking care of him was going, so he decided he had to go too. There wasn't any special reason, which was okay, which was really the truth in a way, and got him out of other criminal trouble. I don't remember if there is any. Louisa had occasionally was getting something illegally to jail by bribery, a sausage, couple of lemons, unusual luxury, totally out of, vitamin tablets, which was but a great deal of money and effort from the underground smuggled for her to jail by Christian. And I was, of course, getting the Red Cross food for sick prisoners, so we were doing all right. And then came the day of liberation of Denmark, armistice. Well, whole Europe got free, except the prisoners in Westerfängsel, because Gestapo was so scared that they're going to get murdered that they sat with us inside the Fengsel and they were not letting anybody out. They were hanging for dear life, because they figured out as long as they hang on to the cream of the Danish society, the writers, the newspapers, the former ministers, members of parliament, members of even prominent families, industrialists, anybody that was anybody was in jail. So they were hanging on to us. In 2 days, there was Germans surrounding the jail inside and the Danish underground outside. Finally, the Danish underground got mad and they said, you have 2 hours to let the Red Cross in first. First the Red Cross, International Red Cross, then everybody else. Now in the meantime, we sitting in jail and we seeing fireworks and light and people singing national anthem and drinking and whooping it up, and we are sitting in jail. And of course, as always in jail, they say that the Germans have dynamite and they're going to dynamite us rather than release us as witnesses of what they were doing. So we are all doing, from we getting out in 15 minutes to we getting killed in 15 minutes, any shade in between. Finally, the Danish underground got fed up, gave them 2 hours. They let the Red Cross in, then the representative of the underground came. They took the Gestapo out. It was a very strange thing, Generally, you think they're going to rip them to shreds. All the Danish did were booing when the Gestapo and the prisoner guards were leaving. There were assessment, there were SD, they were just booing. Nobody killed anybody. The Germans were totally convinced that they're going to kill. Then they said everybody that is sick or something is wrong with them to get out. So Louise and I get out. then, everybody else was going out of jail. And we were in the beginning, I guess there's several pictures of me in Danish publication, because Louise and I were one of the first to come out. And there was this incredible moment when there was a cordon outside of Danish underground and Danish civil army, so to speak. And we were walking out of the jail and the prisoners were cheering us and waving and everything. And then a little farther down, there was this cordon and there were hundreds of people that had either prisoners in jail or relatives or just were sorry for the prisoners, screaming and yelling and hooray and waving Danish flags and everything. Well, Uncle Ivar figured out that in that mob, chance of going there and missing us was pretty even, so he decided to stay home to be there. So who came? The janitor came, my friend the janitor. The first person that embraced me and took my little satchel to carry home. There was, of course, no transportation, you had to walk. And how far was it? I would say it was at least 2 miles from the jail to back to where my family lived. So I had to walk, so he took my satchel and he was embracing me and kissing me. He was crying. First of all, I had to calm him down because he cried crocodile tears. It always happens to me. The people that are rescuing me are crying crocodile tears, and I have to calm them down before they can be reasonable. So we got out of there. And the kids came out, my mother, but how they got back home, I don't know, because they really were. Once we got separated, there was no way to get back together. So I don't know, everybody somehow got back to where they needed to be. And then there were things that started, very interesting thing. There was an Allied military mission, and there was a Polish liaison officer. And my mother had a big mouth. The person that came running to the apartment was the guy that was in charge of the underground, the operation that didn't work out. He felt terribly guilty. He knew that we were in jail, he couldn't do much about it, he felt terrible. So he came, and among other things, he told me that the entire time, from the day we were taken, he couldn't help thinking about what's happening. So he said if there was anything he could do to help me, just ask and I will do everything I can. Now, a guy high in the underground at that time in Denmark was nothing to sneeze out. So, Uncle Ivar packed us off to a sanatorium which was right outside Copenhagen to get a medical checkup and so on. I had those falling out hair, I had still scars from all these things, so we got good food. The funniest thing was that my uncle signed up for it too, to be with us and keep us calm. So it was my mother and me, the kid, and my aunt and uncle went to kind of ride herd on us, because the ladies were pretty strung up, and he knew that it wouldn't work. Well, the place was Swedish hut kind of organization, and there were saunas and massages and rubbing and diet, all vegetarian. It was very expensive. I would say at today's prices it probably was about $300 a day, but it was medical help and steam baths and treatments and doctor every morning and special diet. And my uncle was paying the same and eating the same, oatmeal and like everybody else, but he got very hungry. So in the evening, he found a taxi that would come to the gate, and he would take me, and we would go to the nearest restaurant and have a big piece of beef with potatoes and cream and mushroom and aquavit and wine and beer. We stuff ourselves like pig, and then we would sneak back to the sanatorium to wrinkle next morning at the oatmeal and juices and everything that we were fed, and the carrot steaks and the, So he paid a fortune, and then he paid a fortune. And I remember the taxi driver who took us 2 or 3 times, he said, I just don't understand it. Why do pay such a money to go and sneak out to eat? Why do people do it? He was making money out of it. He was just hanging there for, apparently we were not the only customers, but he just couldn't understand it. My mother and aunt were registered as eating what they were supposed to. I signed up with, however, lots of those steam baths and things had, I imagine, good effect on me. First of all, it was, there was sun lamps, which after sitting, the jail was terribly cold because it was very thick walls, and the Germans boarded the windows, so it was very little. Theoretically outside it wasn't that cold anymore, but in the jail it was 10 degrees lower than everybody else. And then my mother decided to go and look for relatives, family. So she decided the place to go is the Red Cross. The Red Cross told her that they are terribly overworked, everybody is looking for everybody. They will put the names in the pipeline, so to speak. But there was also a Polish liaison officer in the Allied military mission, which was in the Dagmarhus, what the Gestapo was. That was now Allied military mission. And there was this wonderful difference between how the British operate and how the Germans operate. If you wanted to go there during the German regime, you had to have a piece of paper with a stamp, with your fingerprint, with heavens know what. And if you had the paper, and that's how the underground used to get that, make the papers full, you got in. Without the paper, you didn't exist. The British, when I went there, first day we had to explain ourselves. They made a phone call, we were allowed to go in. And my mother kept on talking about my brother possibly being in England, and such a person possibly being in things. And we of course asked about Tomek Kanarek, where he disappeared to help us find him. Everybody realized. Some people that work for our family that spend entire lives working, we wanted to have information. I didn't say what. The officer in charge, which I later found out was working in a foreign office, and spoke French, English, and German and Polish, and was a pretty smart guy. He wanted to, kept on saying, looking at me and saying, is that who I am? So my mother said, that's my daughter. We speak German, yes. Then he talked again, he says, do you speak English? No. And then a few minutes later, do you speak Danish? Yes, whatever I knew Danish. After jail, several months in jail, speaking nothing but Danish, my Danish has improved a great deal. And then he said, you want to work here? I said, no. Because in the meantime, I approached Tom, whose name was actually different, and asked him if he could help me. I would like to go back to school. If he could help me get into school. Explain my situation is very bad. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any papers from Poland. But is there any way of getting? Well, he said, I have to talk to my brother. I will try to get you in. And sure enough, they found a way of getting me a part-time job and a way to going to Copenhagen University. How they did it, don't ask me. The job was in a great Danish concern, Swedish-Danish concern, and I think also connected with Switzerland, that was supposed to part-time, that was supposed to give me enough money to put myself through school. The problem was that I had to be a union member. Now, my chances of getting to a Danish union were very slim. However, when the Danes were told that I was a refugee, that I was in Västra Fängsel, they said, okay, we'll make an exception. We will take her. She can pay very small dues and she can be a member of the union, she can work here. They used the same approach to allow me to go in and first half a year study Danish so I could pass an examination, very intensive Danish so I could, and then to continue to go to school. So when Major Knowles said, you want to work here? I said, no. Well, my mother with her big mouth, she had to brag about me, and she told him what a hero I was in the underground, and his ears went up, and he said, how did you get demobilized? Well, I wasn't. I was sworn in the underground in the beginning of the war, and I was kind of hanging in Krakow, but I was never discharged in any way. Ha! You are called back to duty. That's it. And he actually borderline threatened me, And my mother, of course, was very anxious to find out things about my brother who was in England, those people. They were actually, the Allied military mission was, the first people that came were by parachute to Copenhagen to start the mission there. So there was no mail, no telephone, not even telegrams between countries right after. Nothing. They were afraid of espionage, all kinds of things. Nothing. They had nothing established. Everything was. So my mother started pushing, and eventually I said, okay, for a short while to help you out. He said, do you know how to type? No. Finally, to finish him off, I said, I don't like to type. I did everything I could to spike that proposition, but nothing helped. I got caught. Finally, to add insult to injury, he sent to England for a battle dress. Battle dress. You know what it looks like? It's those tight pants in Montgomery jacket. Montgomery. Do you know what women, especially when they shape like women, look in battle dress? It's total disaster area. I was exactly the wrong shape because I had narrow waist, round hips, prominent bosom. Battle dress on that figure looks terrible. You look like a waddling duck. And I got the uniform cap with the eagle and Poland on it and Poland in here. I tried it on and I decided that thing got to go. It's not going to work. So I very carefully avoided wearing it. I think I wore it once or twice on some, but that was it, and I never again. I said, I die before I parade myself. And it's a terrible outfit for women. Look only well on slim, tall men with really narrow hips and, great thing. That's the only thing it looks, it doesn't even look good on them, but you can get away with it. And also people started arriving. Now, due to my being in newspapers, and my story also got known, and for suddenly the people in the Allied military mission, I got a couple of nicknames. They were calling a nickname for me. And first I went back to the Danes and said, okay, the war is over. You gave me all those false passports that I'm Danish. Now the agreement was when the war ends, I give you back the passport and you give me some other passport. They said, we are very busy right now, we don't have time, just keep on going on that false passport. We know where you are, we know what you find, you don't worry about it. Then a few months later, I wanted to go to Sweden. So I went again, I said, now I'm leaving Denmark, I need a real passport. I said, no, you just go, it will be easier for you in Sweden with a Danish passport, just forget, when we will need you, we'll find you. So I'm running around in Denmark still with my false name and my Danish passport. And everybody seems to be totally complacent about the situation. The people started arriving, and the first people sent by parachute, some of them were intelligence people. They sent 3, 4, 5 people. Usually one of them was an intelligence person. The other ones were different kinds, and they became military attaches in embassies, since they knew the beginning and the thing. So the Belgian would be a military attaché in the Belgian embassy, the Frenchman in the French embassy, and so on and so on. So I suddenly found myself knowing somebody everywhere. Furthermore, the guy in the foreign ministry that arranged those passports and knew this whole story, he kind of saw that I made sense. So I finally found myself that I had access to a lot of people. And Major Knorr was not stupid. He promptly realized that when he asked for something, there was either pushing by the Allies or people had other things to do. When I showed up at the doorstep, I got things done. So people were coming, like a Polish officer who was hurt in a tank corps and had a wooden leg, had a Swedish wife and child, little girl. And he, like all the other army people, arrived in Copenhagen, and he thought that he could travel on military movement order, not only to Copenhagen, but to Stockholm. But Sweden was neutral, so military order, allied forces, didn't work there. So they told him he has to have a visa. To have a visa, you have to have a passport. All he had is military documents. So Major Knorr seeked him on me. So I went to the Swedish embassy with him, looked the Consul Molander straight in the eye, and I said, the guy lost a leg in a war. He has a wife and child in Sweden. What are you going to go? What are you going to do with him? Are you going to keep him here in Denmark when he's within few hours to his wife and child? Consul Molander looked at me and said, you don't ask the easy ones. So what paper he has? Well, he has this movement order. So he said, there isn't enough room on it to put visa. So I said, glue a piece of paper to it. So there he is, the Swedish consul and I, gluing a piece of paper from the embassy, attaching it to his movement order, which had a photograph, thanks God, on it, and he managed to put a visa on it. But he said, I don't want that examined. You have to give me your word that he's not going to try to stay as a refugee, because all the Scandinavian countries had more refugees. You know, they closed schools, they had no room for more. I said, I promise. And I told the officer, I said, I guarantee it for you. Don't put me, don't just try to stay in Sweden and stay there. Furthermore, he was still member of the army. He had a permit to travel, but he couldn't stay out. He went to Sweden, and I thought he had a visa for, I think, 10 days. But Consul Molander said, I don't want anybody to see it. So what he did is, I knew people in the Danish police, chief of the police as a matter of fact, because of my work with the refugees in camps. And so he said, the policeman will take the Polish officer on a border, and he will talk to the Swedish policeman, and he will let him in, and he can stay there for 10 days or 2 weeks. And he gets back. He do it the same way. So there is no record of this, very unusual. But if he gets caught, he has a visa. So we did all that. So I had cooperation of the consul, cooperation of the Danish police chief, and sworn this Polish officer. I trusted him to coming out. Instead of 10 days, he came out in 3 days. And unfortunately, Swedish women, I hate to say word like that. When he arrived there, apparently before the war he was a very wealthy man. And he had money in Switzerland and in Sweden, where when his wife went to Sweden, he gave her power of attorney to withdraw all his money, which she did. And then when he came to see her and the child, she wouldn't let him see the child. She said she was interested in somebody else. And it was better for the girls forgot him than not to see him. And all she wanted was divorce. She didn't want any part of him and he wasn't getting. She sent the daughter out of Stockholm. He wouldn't be able to find her. Finished, no more. She had all the money, he was crippled. She didn't know what a Polish officer would be. Well, she was wrong, because apparently he also had money in England, which she didn't get hold of, and some in South America, but anyway. So 3 days later, the man comes back, and he looks like a dead warmed over. And I said, what happened? And he said, I tell you. So I went to Major and I said, I got to go. Just let me out. So I went out. We went first to a place where we could get something to eat and drink. Nobody was interested in eating, so we just sat there. He told me the story, how the wife received him. And talked and talked and talked. And I think I spent about 2 or 3 days just listening to them. I told Major, no, I don't care how busy you are, I'm out. I will come later maybe and do some work, but just let me be. The guide was really suicidal. I had a very strong feeling that he said he only came out because he gave me his word that I won't get trouble with, get Consul Morander and the police and everybody. That's his moral obligation, but he doesn't really care what happens to him. So we talked and we talked and we talked, and finally I managed to talk him to contact some friends of his that were still in Germany, and he went back to Germany. I told him he had an obligation to get back, not to be a war. He had to do it, and he left. And then I had this whole string of similar things. One that I think is very funny, and the guy's probably dead by now, which is a secret. There was, when the war was ending, a sergeant, regular professional soldiers, spent all his life in the army, was in charge of 570-something prisoners of war. And they were close to the German-Denmark border. So he on his own decided he's getting his buddies out of Germany in the bombs and marched them over the border into, of course, prisoners of war. They were naturally let in. So there is 500 Polish prisoners of war sitting in a camp. Now he ran the camp with an iron hand. And in winter, for a Polish soldier to be out of a winter coat is being out of uniform. It's not allowed. Sweaters, mufflers, no way. All the prisoners, all 500 odd of them, had 2 coats. So every 2 hours, 2 of them got a coat and got to walk outside the camp. He with an iron hand kept the rest in a can. Till summer, that was the routine. So one of the first things I started to working in with Red Cross and people in London, started yelling to send some military coats for those poor guys, you know, considering that they have been so many years without girlfriends, cigarettes and everything. It was a horrible situation. So first thing I got from the Polish Navy. Now I don't know if you are aware that if there are any British troops on any continent, the British law says that there has to be a British ship. Now, Polish Navy in 1939 did one of the smartest things, and that was Marshal Śmigły-Rydz. He did a brilliant thing. He took all the Polish gold out of the Bank of Poland, the Polish National Bank, loaded on submarines and sent to England. Every bit of it. So when the Germans came and swooped on the Polish bank, there was not one brick of gold which was used by them to buy weapons and food and everything. They were all gone. And also the whole Navy went. Submarines went and the Navy went. All the Polish, not many, but there were a couple of big ships and few smaller ones, and the submarines. And all the planes were ordered out of Poland to England, and all the pilots and everything. So the result of it was that there was money for people to go to school and help people in Sweden and help Red Cross. So the first thing, but also the ships that went from Poland to England were considered part of the British Navy, allied, but British Navy, and under their command. So when British, of course, had enough of the war, they wanted to stay home, so they kept sending, among other ships, Polish ships to put that requirement. I had a wonderful time because they were, first thing they sent me, they couldn't send the uniforms so fast, but they sent me hundreds and hundreds of boxes of cigarettes. And I mean boxes, you know, crates, which right after the war, cigarettes were the best money you could get. I mean, for carton of British cigarettes, you could buy a Leica, you could buy a, you know, heavens know what. So we distributed to the prisoners the thing. Very shortly after that, another ship brought the overcoats, so they didn't have to out for 2 hours and then back and another. And you know, the two coats were some short, some long. They were wearing them. They're getting pretty worn out too. That is to describe the situation. One of the things that comes to me from American embassy, that among those prisoners, that's his real name, only in translation. His name was Pająk, which means in English spider. Is everyday ordinary Polish soldier named Spider, whose brother is a very wealthy butcher in Chicago. And he is moving earth and heaven and shaking up people from Congress and senators and Army and Navy to get his brother to America. Here is this guy sitting there doing absolutely nothing. And here he has a visa ready to go to America. What he needs is a passport. To get passport and visa, he needs to be demobilization paper from Polish army. Now, by that time, my mother blubbered to Major know my career in making papers, everything. She gave my life story away. So we sent military cable to London to get Spider demobilized. To which we get an answer that goes exactly like what I'm saying. The commission that is going to elect the members of the staff and Polish government in exile that will eventually shape how to demobilize Poles in Allied countries hasn't been formed yet. So we don't know things. Spider's got to sit and wait till the commission will form, then they will elect somebody, then they will decide how to do it. We're looking at several years. So Major Knoll looked at me and I said, I know. We are getting demobilization for Spider. And he said, go ahead, do it. So I started waltzing around the office. I was very welcome in most of the offices. So I show up, kind of say, hello, how are you? And look at the desk. And there I saw a piece of very fancy paper with a very nice decoration of it. And it was very strange outfit. I remember it. It doesn't exist anymore. It was Parachute, the first Royal Witch Company. There was a group of parachute people which choose as their emblem witch on a thing. And it was very unusual stamp, and you couldn't really see very well what it was, unless you knew what it was. But they got so much shot up during the war that they disbanded the thing. But at that time, they still had it on, and they were very proud of it. And I said very sweetly to them, oh, that's pretty. Took one piece of paper. Well, nobody was going to say anything to me when I like military mission, so I waltzed out with it. Then I waltzed to another office, and there was a stamp, and I was playing with it, and stamped on the desk and said, you should stamp all over. And I put one stamp on the bottom of the piece of paper. And then I talked to some more to them. I got the paper out of there, I got out of there. So I had a beautiful stamp that has nothing to do with the Royal Witch Company, but looked very impressive. And we went back to I got something else, I forgot, and took it back. Major taught me how to, fill it out, the mobilization paper. Then we looked at each other and he said, ladies first. I said, no, you are senior rank. So he signed unreadable, then I signed unreadable, and then he put another Polish, verified by Polish liaison on it, stamp, and we gave Spider his demobilization paper. And the American embassy accepted it. I don't know whether it was friendship or they just didn't want to bother, or they understood the situation. Anyway, Spider went happily, got a ticket, and very happily went to his butcher brother in Chicago and lived there, I hope, happily ever after.
Should we take a break here?
Okay. But after the war, this is the beautiful time when the Allies were in and I was helping people. I was going to the refugees camps and prisoners of war camps and helping. Basically, I was able to do something and help people. And some people recognize me for my efforts. And I remember that the commander of a Polish cruiser, Commander Tłużnicki, came, and he was very strange man. His sailors adored him, but they said, God help you if you do something wrong. He went, when somebody really stepped over the line, he would go, he had a little chapel in the ship, he would go and pray there, and then he would come out and give a punishment. And they said it was just, but it was just more than anybody else would have given, little more than anybody else. He was very strict. And he arrived and he really worked. So when he arrived in Copenhagen, he found out from people who was doing what. And one day, I was always going on the Polish ship, invited as a guest. But I just came with a bunch of Danes and a bunch of allied people from embassies. What basically, we didn't have Polish government, so what basically those ships did, they would go to Major Nolan and said, do you have any obligation, you would like to do something nice for somebody that cooperates with you? So he would say, oh, invite this guy, and they would get invited, which was a wonderful thing, as a guest of the ship. And I was always there, you know, sometimes helping, little translating, sometimes this and that. For example, the chief of police didn't speak English. He spoke German and Swedish. He didn't speak Polish or English, so I was always called to translate for him. And when Commander Tłużnicki came, he, being a hard-working guy, decided to throw a party, really big party, told Major No. It was work for them, because all the guys wanted, the officers, they wanted to go on shore and chase girls and drink and buy gifts for their relatives in England or something. But they had to stand there and talk and serve drinks and entertain. So it was basically duty. So I went there and I forgot, some excuse was used. One of the officers came to the office to give me a ride or something. We went to the ship, there is the plank, and there are the guys that, you know, when a commanding officer comes, they pipe you on board, and they pipe you on board for this and that. And we are going, and the officer takes my arm, and we watch, and they start piping up. So I look, who is coming, you know? And I almost fell off the stupid plank because I keep on looking, who is coming? So I turned to the officer, who is coming? And he said, keep quiet, you. So I said, what is all this, you know, thing for? He said, you are the guest of the commander. So I think, they never did that before, you know. But there's no choice, you know, he's hanging on to me, you know, and we get up, again there are guys greeting me, and commander comes next to me, and I stand next to him and talk for a few minutes, then we go into the main party things, and everybody's running around serving food, serving drinks. And he said, I would like to, Commander Tucci said, like to make an announcement. He said, they usually, when a ship is in port, the officer picks the senior Polish lady to host, which was the case before with him. He said, I'm going to create new transit. I'm going to take the youngest one. Basically what he did was, because I could stand next to him and translate Danish, some Swedish, Polish, some German. Basically, the Danish and the Swedish, what was the biggest attraction, because some people spoke some English, some people spoke some German, but the combination of all of it was... So I stood next to him receiving. Of course, some people will look at me, eyes could kill. But anyway, I stood there next to him and translated for him, especially the guys that didn't speak English, which... And 2 hours later, the guests started leaving. And I started leaving, and he says, no, you stay. So finally all the Danes and all the Swedes and all the Belgians and all the French and even the British left. And a few Polish officers, and Commander Tużnicki says, now we're going to have a party. And we went to the officers' mess, sat around the table. I may have a picture of it. We sat around the table, and his favorite snack, which his cook knew, were rye bread covered with sardines. So we got smashed sardines on rye bread and tea and coffee, no more drinks. We were all, we were drinking tea and eating the sardines, and everybody, the guys got relaxed, and joking and smelling, and he was very friendly. It was, everybody spoke Polish, we were laughing, we were joking. It was private, special. Thank you for, helping me entertain all those people and everything. So there were some benefits out of it. Later on, I think the following day, those officers showed up in Allied military mission, and there was a Polish lady that used to hang around. Her name was Barbara Chomicka. She was a very attractive young woman. And they came over and they asked us to show them Copenhagen a little bit. So we went in a taxi and we took them to see the Royal Palace, and got out of the taxi. We took them to see the art buildings and things. And one of them announced that I am from a part of Poland that has no ocean, no seashore. There are just forests. I would like to see a forest. So at 12 o'clock at night, we went to the grounds of the Royal Palace, which had a very tame group of deer hanging out there. And we climbed in the mud out of the taxi and went into the forest. And everything went fine till the deer got curious who came there at night. And suddenly you felt sniffling, or of course totally tame, sniffling on your back, and the deer were investigating who the hell comes there in the middle of the night.
Well, thank you very much, Janina, for speaking with us, and we'll schedule again so that we can speak to you some more.
I know all of those are war stories, but they are after the war stories.
We're interested in